All right, Shavuos, good morning. Let us begin. So start by thanking our sponsors, our Talmud Torah sponsors for the month of Av, Max and Brenda Lapkovsky, in honor of the upcoming Bar Mitzva of their son Yitzhak Meir, Dr. Riva Mitzner In, commemoration of the first yartzheit of her father, Dr. Larry Schneck, Aryeh ben Chaim, Jack Bennett, in honor of Sargent Omer TAVIV, who was killed by a Hamas Anti-Tank Missile on the Gaza border on May 12th, 2021. We hope that in the merit of our Talmud Torah, the Neshamas will have an Aliyah, the family in the Bar Mitzva will be Matzliach. And to thank our Daf Yomi sponsor for today, Natan and Leah Berry, in memory of Leah's father, Tzvi, Sherizan, Eliezer, Avraham, Tzvi, Ben Pesachya, Leib, we hope that in the merit of our Talmud Torah, the Neshamas will have an Aliyah, and the family in Chama. And with that, let us begin. So today's daf is Yud Tes. So let's, just by way of introduction a little bit, let's actually go back to Yud Chesamad Beis 18a, the Itmar, just to pick up on that case. Now, to reorient ourselves, or to remind ourselves just a bit, so remember, the Gemara is currently focused on a machlokes Abaye and Rava that took place on the bottom of Yud Ches Amud Aleph. So remember again, in that machlokes we had the following situation. We had, I'll just quote to you, it's the last two lines of Yud Ches Amud Aleph 18a, where the Gemara said as follows: Itmar sichich al gabe achsadra sheyesh la petzimin. So remember again, this is from the end of Amud Aleph of yesterday's daf, which was, you're going ahead, we're dealing with our case of an achsadra. So remember again, this was the situation of, if you could imagine, a chatzar that has, each of the individual homes in the chatzar has an overhang porch, that's called the achsadra. You placed schach on top of the achsadra, right? So essentially, what you're going ahead is, you're utilizing the porch overhangs to go ahead and support your schach. Now, remember again, the problem was in that case, remember again, what was the problem? There was more than Dalet Amas from the wall, ultimately again to the schach. Therefore, you cannot use the top of the achsadra, I should say, you cannot be machshir the achsadra while utilizing dofen akuma. Remember, dofen akuma only works if you have less than 4 amos of pasol schach in between the wall and the kasher schach. So we can't use dofen akuma. If you have petzimin, if you have columns, and those columns are less than 3 tefachim from the other, then you could utilize what? Lavud, right? Then it's a wall. Then you can utilize lavud. But halacha l'maisa, okay, I'm sorry. But halacha l'maisa, again, we're dealing over here with a case where there are no petzimin. So the question is such a sukkah kosher or not? Rav said it's kosher. Abaye said it's pasul. I'm sorry, just the opposite. Abaye said it's kosher. Rav said it's pasul. Abaye said it's kosher. Why? Because Abaye was holding pitikra yored v'sosim. So the way Abaye understood it was that essentially we look at the edge of the porch overhang, which is what we're calling the achsadra, and we view the edge of that as extending downwards and creating a wall, creating an enclosure. Okay, so we'll say, so now with that, the Gemara says as follows: the itmar achsadra bebeka. We'll say, I'm assuming you did this in yesterday's daf already. I'm assuming you got to the end, right? You got to the end of the daf. So we'll just go back. We'll just go back a little bit, just to reorient ourselves for today's conversation. The itmar, last 5 lines. Yud Ches Amud Beis. The itmar achsadra bebeka. If you have an achsadra, so we'll say, if you can imagine again, an achsadra. I don't know, the word that's often used is a portico or a pergola. If you could just imagine, it's a roofed structure with no walls. I'm sorry? Yeah, good. A pergola. Good. So you have a roof, right? But remember again, a pergola usually has an open roof, right? I think. No? Okay, whatever. A roofed structure. You have a roofed structure with no walls. And what happens? So we'll say this is a Hilchos Shabbos Shaila. So now, can I carry underneath that pergola or not? So Achsadra bebeka Rav Amar Mutra Talta Bekula Darmina Pitik Yard V'Sosim. Rav says you can carry underneath that entire pergola. Why? Because we view it as enclosed. Now, how do you view it as enclosed? It has no walls. We view about, say, again, we've seen this before. We saw this in Mesachas Shabbos and Mesachas Eruvin Essentially what we view is the edge of the roof as extending downward. This is a halacha l'Moshe Sinai called Pi Tikra Yored V'Sosim. Therefore, we view the entire area as if it is enclosed. Shmuel says, "Im metaltalin ba elav dalat amis." The Lamina Pi Tikra Yored V'Sosim. And Shmuel says, "Halacha l'Maisa." No, we don't view the edges of the roof as if it extends downwards. Therefore, it's an unenclosed area. If it's an unenclosed area, then you can only carry within dalat amis of it in Shabbos. So the Gemara says as fast. Well, so what the Gemara is trying to do, you saw this in yesterday's daf. It is just chazara. What the Gemara is trying to do is align the machlokes Rav and Shmuel by Hilchos Shabbos with the machlokes of Abaye and Rava in Sukkah. It's the Gemara wants to assume that it is the same exact machlokes. To which the Gemara says, "Aliba de Shmuel koli amalo pligi." So according to Shmuel, everyone will agree that halacha l'maisa. Same way Shmuel will say that you can't carry in this open-walled achsadra on Shabbos. You also can't utilize such a sukkah for sukkahs. And you can't see pitikra v'sosim. To which the Gemara says, "Ki pligi." So where does the machlokes occur? Top of your test. Ki pligi. Aliba de Rav. The machlokes comes up according to Rav, says the Gemara. How so? Abaye kirav. So Abaye will go ahead and hold like Rav. So remember again, Abosai, Abaye holds that we will say pitikra yored v'sosem by the achsadra. That if you have an overhang of a porch, Abaye says, and you put the schach on top of that, remember, you can't use dofen akuma over here. Why can't you use dofen akuma? Why not? More than dalat amas. Good. So halacha l'maisa, he'll hold pitikra yored v'sosem. So Abaye will hold like Rav, and Rava Amar Lacha. Rava will say like this: Adkan lo ka'amar Rav. Rav only allows you to do this by Hilchos Shabbos. Why? We'll say this is incredible. Lo adkan lo ka'amar Rav hasam ela de mechitzos lachsadrhu da'avidi. Aval hacha delav lahachi avidi lo. We both say this is fascinating. So comes along Rava, and Rava will say it's not fair to equate the Shita of Rav by Shabbos to Sukkah. And I'll tell you why. Here's the difference. Even if you subscribe to the notion of Pitik or Yord V'Sosim, we'll say this is incredible. Do you know when Pitik or Yord V'Sosim will apply? It applies when you're enclosing an area for which those mechitzos were made. But you cannot utilize Pitik or Yord V'Sosim to enclose an area for which the mechitzos were not made. What does that mean? So to contrast the two cases, what do you have in Shabbos? In Shabbos, you have a structure. You have a structure, and the structure doesn't have walls. It has a roof, but it doesn't have walls. Okay, so that's where we'll say pitikir v'sosim. We'll view the edges of the roof as extending downwards and enclosing the area, because those walls, so to speak, were made for that structure. Now remember again, I know it sounds strange. Why does it sound strange? There are no walls. There are no walls. What the Gemara is suggesting is that the halacha l'Moshe Sinai of pi tikar yard v'sosim means when you want to extend the roof walls down to enclose that particular area. You have a roofed area. Pi tikar yard v'sosim means we view the edges of the roof as extending downwards and enclosing that same area. Bose, what's happening in Sukkah? What's happening in Sukkah? Remember again, you have porch overhangs, is what we're calling it, for lack of a better term, right? You have roofs over the porch. So we'll say, then what do you do afterwards? That's step one. Step two, you put schach on top of that. Step three, what do you want to do to make? Because you can't use dofen akuma; it's more than 4 amas away. So what do you want to do? You want to view the edges of the porch roof as extending downwards. There's only one problem, which is that porch roof is not made for the sukkah. What is the porch roof made for? The porch. So the Gemara is suggesting that pi tikar yard v'sosim only works to enclose an area for which the rooftop itself was made to service. But to say pi tikar yard v'sosim by a roof, to extend a roof down to enclose an area for which the roof was not made. Let me say a little bit clearer. Pi tikar yard v'sosim says a roof could extend downwards to go ahead and create walls for the intended roofed area, but not for the unintended roofed area. That's the halacha l'Moshe Sinai. So in Shabbos, where I have a roofed area, it just doesn't have walls. Pi Tikr V'Sosim will enclose the roofed area. But in the case of Sukkah, where you're going ahead and you want to utilize an achsadra, you want to utilize the roof of the achsadra to now Pi Tikr to enclose the Sukkah, that's not what the roof is there for. The roof is there to function as the roofed part of a porch, not as the wall of the sukkah. So the Gemara is suggesting you cannot utilize the halacha l'Moshe Sinai in that situation. They will say this is a riveting idea. It's a rivet. It's a schus the first day back 5 minutes into the Shiva, have something riveting. It's incredible. We'll say so again. I just want to point out this is an incredible qualification in the halacha l'Moshe Sinai, because before we saw this Gemara, you would assume that if you hold Pi Tikr V'Sosim, then it doesn't matter the intended roofed area, unintended roofed area. Pi Tikr V'Sosim essentially means is you could take the thickness of the roof, extend it downward, and create a halachic wall. Now what the Gemara is suggesting is that only applies to the intended roofed area, not to the unintended roofed area. The nafkamina case will be the case of where you put schach, on top of the achsadra, and you want to enclose the sukkah by extending the edge of the roof of the achsadra. The only problem is the sukkah is not the intended roofed area. To which the Gemara goes weiter. Tanan, so let's analyze this a little bit more. So Tanan, v'chein chatzra mukefas achsadra. So the Gemara says, so too if you have a chotzer that is surrounded by an achsadra. So I'll say this is the case in the Mishnah. So I have a chotzer, ultimately again, that has roofed porches. I want to put some schach on top of that roofed porch. And now make a sukkah. So va'amai, why it should be problematic? Nema pitik revisosim. Why don't I say that the edge of the porch roof extends down and forms a wall for the sukkah? So we'll say this is incredible. If you want to look in the pictures, so this is picture 121. Picture in the PDF I sent out yesterday. So picture 121. Actually, this sefer, I have pictures in the back of my Gemara. Unfortunately, they don't align. It happens to be, I think the pictures in the back of my Gemara are better than these pictures. It's not a competition. I'm just saying. So you could see over here, I'm going to try to take some better pictures of the ones I have. But you could see 121. This is incredible as well. Kishehishes kirvose means as this. When you think about, just think about for just a moment, when you think about the case of putting schach on top of the porch roof, how do you envision it? Where are you putting the schach? On top. The Gemara is suggesting over here that the case you're dealing with, and I think you can see it in the picture, is where you're essentially putting the schach flush with the porch roof. So this is another incredible qualification. The Gemara is suggesting that when do we say Pi Tikra Yored V'Sosim? Only where there is an observable and visible roof thickness. But when the roof thickness essentially is flush with the schach, you cannot say Pi Tikra Yored V'Sosim. We'll say just the logic behind that is, when do we say that the thickness of the roof is halachically viewed as extending down and creating a wall? When you can see the thickness of the roof. But when the thickness of the roof is not visible, because in this case again, the schach is flush with it, we don't say Pi Tikra V'Sosim. Another incredible qualification of this halacha. So the Gemara goes weiter. That was Besura Masni Lahashmaita. And so the Gemara says, Besura Masni Lahashmaita B'Hai Lishna. In Surah, so they quoted this halacha in the way we just quoted it before. But Pumpadisa, Masni, they quoted as follows. If you put schach on top of an achsadra, a porch roof that does not have pitzimin. Pitzimin are boards or columns. Divrei hakol psula. Everyone agrees that it's possible. Yesh la pitzimin. What if it has columns? Abayi amar kshera. Abayi will say that it's kosher. The sukkah is kosher. Rava amar psula. Rava will say that it's possible. Abayi amar kshera. Abayi will say that it's kosher. Why? Amrina and lavud. Because he'll say, remember, we're obviously dealing with a case where the columns are less than 3 tefachim away from each other. Therefore, we'll say lavud. Rava amar psula, lo amrinan lavud. Rava will say that it's possible. Ultimately, again, because we don't say lavud. V'hilchasa kilish nakama. And Abba said, the Gemara says we choose to adopt the first version of this machlokes. The version they had in Surah, which also means as follows, that the machlokes Abaye and Rav is not about lavud. Everyone agrees with lavud. The machlokes was about pi tikra yored v'sosim. And I will say the machlokes is a very nuanced machlokes in particular. Remember, everyone will adopt the principle of pi tikra yored v'sosim. What's the machlokes over here? Do you say pi tikra yored v'sosim for the unintended roofed area or not? That's this case. That's what's fascinating about this. I want to utilize, remember again, I'm utilizing the porch roof. And what I want to do is to create a kasher sukkah, I want to view the edge of the porch roof as extending down and creating a halachic wall, thereby enclosing my sukkah. There's only one issue, which is, again, the classic case of particular visosim means extending the roof to create an enclosure for the roofed area. Can you go ahead and say particular visosim for the unintended roofed area, in this case, which is your sukkah? That's the machlokes, to which the Gemara goes weiter. Good. Ravashi, Ashkechel Rav Kahana, the Kamasachei Chagabe Achsad, Shein Laptzivin. Ravashi one time found Rav Kahana, who made a sukkah, utilizing the roof of the porch, and there were no columns. I think there might have been a picture of this, or maybe not. Yeah, so this is picture 122. Again, you don't really need a picture for this. This is just this is the same case. So he found them making a sukkah, utilizing the roof of the porch without pillars. Amar lei lo savalama hada amar Rava yesh la b'tzimim kshera ein la b'tzimim pasul. So ultimately, Rav Ashi says to Rav Kahana, don't you hold of what Rava said, that it's only kosher if it has columns, but if it doesn't have columns, doesn't have pillars, it's pasul. This is very interesting about saying, this is fascinating. So interestingly enough, so Rav Kahana showed Rav Ashi, this sukkah actually had a third wall. Remember again about say the halacha we paskin by sukkah. How many walls does sukkah need? How many walls? 2 walls. But remember, 3 walls I should say. 3 walls, but the third one only has to be what? A tefach. So interestingly enough, what happened in this case is Rav Kahana said to Rav Ashi, calm down. There's a third wall. I'm not relying on particular visosim. There is a third wall. But it was a very small third wall. And not only that, Rabosai, but it was either one of these 2 cases. It was either Nira mi bifnim v'shava mi b'achotz, a wall that could be seen from the inside of the sukkah. If you were standing inside, you would have seen the tefach. But when you're looking at the sukkah from outside, that little tefach wall is flush with the other wall, so it looks like a sukkah that only has 2 walls. Or inami nira mi bachutz v'shava mi bifnim. Now, Rabosai, this case is a bit more of a chiddush. Nira mi bachutz and shava mi bifnim, Rabosai, means as follows. If you can imagine, you have a 3-wall sukkah. You have 2 walls, 2 regular walls, both right perpendicular, and then you have the third tefach wall. Rabosai, but imagine the third tefach wall does not extend into the sukkah. Instead, what happens? It extends out of the sukkah. That's called nira mi bachutz. You could see that third tefach wall from the outside, but if you were standing inside of the sukkah, it would look like what? It would look like what? Just 2 walls. You could see, I believe, that there's a picture of this as well. Yes, so this is pictures 123 and 124. Nira mi bifnim b'chutz. The Gemara says the itmar, because we learned by lechi nira mi b'chutz v'shava mi bifnim. That I will say this is picture 125. That if you have, remember again, you have a lechi. So remember, so we know this halacha. You have a mavui, which is an alleyway. The halacha is in order to be able to carry in the alleyway, you need a lechi or a korah. So remember, so what happens if you place your lechi flush with the wall of the mavoi on the outside, which means you can't see that lechi from inside the mavoi. Interestingly enough, you can only see it from outside. Halacha l'maisa, that works. The Gemara says, nido mishum lechi v'hainu b'tzimin. So we'll say, so something very interesting comes out over here. So essentially, what happens is Rav Ashi sees Rav Kahana. He thinks Rav Kahana is sitting in a 2-walled sukkah, and that Rav Kahana is utilizing the pi tikra yored v'sosim of the roof of the porch in order to create this third wall. To which Rav Ashi says, Rav Kana, hey, what's going on over here? That's machlokes how you are lying on it. To which Rav Ashi responds, no, I have a third wall, but you don't see it. Either because it was a case of Nira mibifnim and Shava mibachotz, and Rav Ashi was standing outside, or it was a case of Nira mibachotz v'Shava mibifnim, and Rav Ashi was standing inside. Both an incredible Musar Haskell. Just because you think you see something does not mean it's true. That how often in life do we rush to judgment about people and about circumstances because we think that we've seen all there is to see. We think we've taken in all there is to take in. I think I have all the information. I have all the facts. In reality, I don't. This happens even to great people like Rav Ashi. Rav Kana says, there's a wall. You just didn't see it. So we'll say that concludes the sugi here. We'll say what I want to point out is when it comes, because this is very important, herein lies this sugya highlights one of the fundamental distinctions between lavud and pitikir v'sosem. We'll say, so what do I mean by that? The halacha by lavud is if you have, let's say again, taking from this case over here of columns, if you have columns that are less than 3 tfachim apart from each other, what's the status of that wall of columns? It's a wall. It doesn't matter if the columns were made to service here or to service there. Lavud creates a wall. That's what it does. And once a wall is a wall is a wall. We don't care, was the wall for the porch, was the wall for the sukkah, was the wall for Reuven, was the wall for Shimon. Lavud creates a de facto reality that things that are less than 3 tefachim away from each other, columns less than 3 tefachim away from each other, halacha l'maisa are a solid wall. But we do adopt the nuanced distinction by pitikra yard v'sosim. That halacha l'maisa of pitikra v'sosim, which means we could view the thickness of the roof as extending down, creating a wall, that only works when? For the intended roofed area. This is incredibly important. And that is halacha l'maisa. Only for the intended roofed area. So herein lies the distinction between Shabbos, the case of Shabbos that we saw, and the case of Sukkah. So Rabbi said, what was the case of Shabbos? I have an achsadra. I have a pergola. I have a roofed pergola. And now, but no walls. Can I carry underneath it on Shabbos? So again, Rav Paskin's the answer is yes. Why? What do I hold? Pi tikr yod v'sosim. Why? Why can I pi tikr v'sosim? Why? Because again, I'm extending the roof to create walls for the intended roofed area. Rabbi say, let's jump to Sukkah for just a moment. You want to build your Sukkah, right? I'm going to put my schach. I have a, let's say a couple of homes. Each has a roofed porch area. I want to put the schach on top of the roof, right? The porch roofs. And I want to utilize particularly the sosim of the porch roofs to extend downwards and create the walls of my sukkah. Will that work? No. Why? Because we'll say, remember again, the only way that we can say particularly the sosim for the porch roofs is to enclose the areas underneath the porch roof. But particular yard of sosim will not work to enclose the unintended roofed area. A very important, nuanced distinction in this halacha. Incredible. Let's go weiter. Says the Gemara Tana, Psal hayotzim min ha-sukkah nidam ki-sukkah. Interesting case. Let's say you have schach that extends out of a sukkah, so it has the din of a sukkah. Okay, what does that mean? My psal yotzim min ha-sukkah, Amr Ula. Kanama yotzim la'achorei ha-sukkah. What it means as follows. Imagine for a moment, by the way, you could look at picture 126. We're not up fully to this picture, but I'll begin to give you a little bit of an illustration. We'll say, if you could imagine the following. Let's say your schach extends off the back of your sukkah. So I have long schach, it extends off the back of my sukkah. So now what the Gemara is suggesting is that area, the schach extension, counts as a kosher sukkah as well. The Gemara says, okay, but v'hava idan shalosh tefanos, but it's not enough to have schach, I need 3 walls also. So if I just have a schach overhang on the back of my sukkah, how can that be treated as a bona fide sukkah if I don't have 3 walls? B'di'ika. No. It means you have 3 walls also. Shabbos says this is interesting. So this is if you look at picture 126, essentially you kind of have 2 sukkahs over here. You have your regular sukkah, but it happens to be that your walls and your schach extend off the back of the primary sukkah as well. So the Gemara says, but you need the schach to provide more shade than sun. B'di'ika, it has all those things. To which the Gemara says, okay, so we'll say, what's the chiddush? What's the chiddush over here? So essentially, I have 2 sukkahs. I don't understand, like, what are you teaching me? Well, this is very interesting. Ma'od tema, hoyil ulegavai avidi, ulebrai lo avidi, emalo. So we'll say, it's an interesting havamina. I might have thought that because the walls and the schach were made for interior use and not for this exterior use, halacha l'maisa shouldn't be kosher. Kamash malan, that's not the case. They'll say an interesting havamina. They'll say now, what exactly is this havamina? Remember, Rabbi say we've seen already that by sukkah there is this element of lishma. Now, lishma could just mean l'shem tzel, right, for the sake of providing shade. It doesn't necessarily. Remember, you do need kavana for sukkah, but you only need kavana for sukkah when? That's first night of Yom Tiv. In the actual construction of the sukkah, all I need is to create a structure for the purpose ultimately of providing shade, or the shem sukkah that was. We saw the discussion about sukkah yishana beforehand. So I might have thought that a sukkah that is primarily made for its interior use, but happens to have this overhang, both of schach and of walls, perhaps that exterior area should not be good. Kamash malan, that is kosher. Good. Rabba of Rav Yosef, Amini Tarvayu. So Rabba say Rabba and Rav Yosef have a different understanding. They understand what's the case. So Birhacha, Bekanim Hayotzim Lifnim Min HaSukkah, Umashcha Va'azla Chada Dofen Bahadayu. So Rabba say, listen to this. Rabba and Rav Yosef have a different version. This is picture 127. In their version of say what the Gemara is actually coming teaching is as follows. Say, look at this. This is actually here. The picture is very helpful. 127. You have a good kosher 3-wall sukkah, but interestingly enough, on the 3rd wall area, where the 3rd wall in this case is shorter than the other 2 walls, your schach extends out. So you see that dotted line over there? The dotted line, the dotted yellow lines. We'll say, there you have an entire area of sukkah that doesn't have a wall. It's an interesting, so the Gemara says, so the Gemara tema, halas lehachsha sukkah. I might have thought that yellow dotted area is not called a kosher sukkah, because at the end of the day it's missing a wall. Kamash malan, it is. Rabbi say, isn't that fascinating? By the way, that is halacha l'maisa. That open area is still considered to be sukkah. Because we'll say, it makes a lot of sense. Why does it make sense? Because halacha l'maisa, essentially, it's not such a chiddush. Once you have that 3rd wall, that all is required to be is what? Is 1 tefach. Halachically, we view that 3rd wall as what? As essentially being a solid wall. In other words, it doesn't have to be a full wall. Once it doesn't have to be a full wall, then it's obvious that anything along that wall is going to be a kosher sukkah as well. So this is, I will say, this is really, really quite fascinating over here. So halacha l'maisa, that sukkah will be kosher as well. Good. Rabba bar Chana Amar Rabbi Yochanan lo nitzcha ela l'sukkah sheruba tzilasa. Sheruba tzilasa miruba mechamasa. Umiuta chamasa meruba mitzilasa. So what's Rabbi Yochanan wants to Rabbi Bar Chana wants to know Rabbi Yochanan know what's the case? It's a case of a sukkah where the majority of the sukkah, the schach provides more shade than sun, but part of the sukkah provides more sun than shade. So this is picture 128. Picture 128. So the Gemara says, so what would I have thought? Ma'udetema. Tipasal bahach porta. But this is actually quite interesting. You might have thought that halacha l'maisa, the part of the sukkah where there's a little less schach, where the schach is chamasa meiruba mitzilasa, you might have thought that part of the sukkah ultimately again is not kosher. Kamash malon, that it is. Umay yotze, what does it mean when it says yotze? Yotze mehechsher sukkah, that even though there's a part of the sukkah where the schach allows in more sun than shade, you might have thought that part of the sukkah, ultimately, again, you can't really be yotzi with that part of the sukkah. Kamash malon, you can. Kamash malon, you can. Now, again, we're going to discuss that case in greater depth in coming dapim. But I will say, but interestingly enough, what the Gemara is suggesting over here is essentially once the majority of the sukkah is clearly kosher, it's machshir the entire sukkah. It's machshir the entire sukkah. Because we'll say the truth is, very often in a sukkah, it happens where you have a pocket here or a pocket there of schach that allows in more sun than shade. What the Gemara is suggesting is, as long as the majority of the sukkah is created in a kosher fashion, then halacha l'maisa, the sukkah is kosher. Even if you're sitting underneath a part of the schach that allows in more sun than shade. Rabbi Oshia Amar lo nitzcha el schach pasel, pachos mishlosha b'sukkah kitana. Rabbi Oshia says there's another difference. The other difference could be in a case of schach pasel, less than shlosha. So we'll say in this case over here. So this is picture 129. Picture 129. So also, what do I have over here? I have a regular sukkah, but I have less than 3 tfachim of schach pasel. Less than 3, again, in one area. So we'll say, what's the halacha? Now we'll say, remember again, what's the status of schach pasel less than 3 tfachim? Status of less than 3 tfachim? Nothing. Right? We'll say, anything less than 3 tfachim is considered to be like what? It doesn't exist. Right, it doesn't exist. So now watch this. The Gemara says, "Umay yotze meTorah sukkah maskef arvoshia lo yehe ela avir va'avir pachos mishlosha tfachim b'sukkah ketana mi pasel." So we'll say at the end of the day, but again, having less than 3 tfachim of schach pasel, should that be any different than airspace? Right? What happens if you just had airspace? And we'll say if you have less than 3 tfachim of airspace, does that invalidate anything? But we'll say, listen to this interesting distinction. Amrli Rabbi Abba, Zeh mitztaref v'yeshenim tachtov, v'zeh mitztaref v'en yeshenim tachtov. Rabbi will say, we're going to see if we adopt this halacha l'maisa, but it's a fascinating distinction. Rabbi Abba says, you're right. At the end of the day, if you have less than 3 tfachim of, we'll call it something that is problematic schach. Now, also, you could have two cases of problematic schach. One case would be what? Nothing. Right? What I mean nothing? Airspace. Airspace is also problematic schach, right? But it's not really, it's the absence of schach. So whether you have less than 3 tfachim of airspace or less than 3 tfachim of schach pasel, is it going to have an impact on your sukkah? Going to have an impact on your sukkah less than 3 tfachim? No. Because remember, any time you have something less than 3 tfachim, we say lavud as if pretty much whatever is there does not exist. But listen to this fascinating situation. Rabbi Abba will say, but there is a distinction. If you have schach pasel, zeh mitztarif. Schach pasel is mitztarif, combines with schach kosher, to then allow for what? You could even sleep. The Gemara says sleep under it. You could even eat your su'uda underneath that schach pasel. Masha'en kein avir, airspace, if you have less than 3 tfachim, does it invalidate the sukkah? Does it invalidate? No. But you cannot eat under it. We'll see, hear this fast. Again, we'll see if we adopt this halacha l'maisa, but do you see this fascinating distinction? Anything less than 3 tfachim, is it going to have a negative impact on your sukkah, on the sukkah in its totality? Does it have an impact? No. But there is an incredible nafkamina. If you have less than 3 tfachim of schach pasel, that will combine with your schach kosher, and you can literally eat underneath the schach pasel. Because the less than 3 tfachim of schach pasel becomes subsumed with the schach kosher. But if you have airspace, even though halachically it does not invalidate the sukkah, it's not really mitztaref with the schach kosher, and therefore, although it doesn't invalidate the sukkah, you cannot eat or sleep underneath that open area. Isn't that incredible? Isn't that absolutely incredible? So we'll say the Gemara. So first of all, you have to understand also there's an incredible Musar Haskell in that, right? See, I will say schach pasel. Let me say avir is emptiness. So in life, the worst thing is inaction. The worst thing is emptiness, is nothingness, because nothingness combines with nothing. Right? Inaction yields nothing. What is schach pasel? So perhaps schach pasel in life represents the things that we do that are less than optimal. I tried something, I endeavored, I pushed myself a little bit. I didn't really create schach kosher, I just created schach pasel. So where it's still schach pasel, at the end of the day, schach pasel is mitztaref with schach kosher. See, I will say, sometimes in life, we fall into this fallacy. You know, I hear this all the time. People say, I never do anything unless it's 100%. So I don't say it, but I often think when people tell me that, wow, you must have a lot of free time on your hands, right? Because if you do nothing unless you could do it 100%, that must mean you do very, very, very little in life. People like that have avir. They have a lot of airspace. You have some schach kasher over here, some schach kasher over here, something nice over an accomplishment over here, but most of your life is just going to be open space areas. So the yisod in life is, it's okay to produce schach pasel. Not all the time, because if you only produce schach pasel, right? If you only produce, less than optimal results all of the time, you don't have a kosher sukkah. But if you spend your life trying to create schach kosher, and here and there's some schach pasel, less than optimal results. Good news is, it's mistarif. It combines. Avir in action gets you nothing. Schach pasel, the things I do in life which are okay but not great, I have to strive for great, but at least okay produces something. An incredible yisod. So says the Gemara, I don't understand. So you tell me schach pasel is mitztarif to schach kosher. But how could that be? Right? In other words, generally, in order for something to be mitztarif, to combine with something, it itself has to be kosher. I'm going to be Yitzhak Meir in. No, there are other examples of this. What's a good example of this? Amadeus in. The Gemara says, Tit hanoruk yochiach. We'll say liquidy mud. Liquidy mud could go, it proves this point. Shemetztarif la'arba'im sa'a. We'll say, this is interesting, hilchos mikvos. Liquidy mud. We'll say, right, the minimum share of a mikvah is 40 sa'a. Let's say you have 39 sa'a of water and 1 sa'a of liquidy mud. The liquidy mud could combine with the water. Vatovel bo lo also lo tvila. But yet if you immerse in 40 sa'a of liquidy mud, that is not a tevila. So there is a concept of say in halacha of something combining with something else in order to create a requisite shear, even though the item by itself is not kosher. Which I will say again, the logic being is that if you have an entity that is kosher, but you just need something else to quote unquote top it off or to finish it off, even something that by itself would not be valid could help be mitztarif. An incredible yisod. So again, I have 39 sa'ah of water of a mikvah. 1 sa'ah of liquidy mud could help me go ahead and finish it off. Because there is an element of water in that. There is an element of water in that. Even though, again, it by itself is not kosher for the mikvah. Same idea. If I have regular schach and less than 3 tefachim of schach pasel, because remember again, schach pasel is still what? Schach. Right? It's just not kosher. Fine. So once I have an overwhelming majority of schach kosher, schach pasel could be mitztarif. Now, I will say again, when we say mitztarif, I want to be clear. You see, the cases are different. In the mikveh case, when we're being mitztarif the liquidy mud, what is the liquidy mud doing? What is it doing? Right? It's being machshir the mikvah. I don't have a mikvah without 40 sa'ah. And I don't have 40 sa'ah without what? Without the mud. That's different than the sukkah case, right? The sukkah is kosher even without the schach pasel. When we say it's mitztarif, what does mitztarif mean? That I could even what? Sit underneath it. So, okay, good, fascinating halacha. Good. Let's say back to Mishnah. How says Succah so come in tzrif? If you make your sukkah like a tzrif, so we'll say this is picture 130. No, well, it's kind of 130. Don't look at the bottom of 130. Don't look at the bottom of 130. Just look at the top. All right, so we'll say you make your sukkah. Tzrif is like a tent. Now Rashi has a more elaborate explanation here. He says, "Kimin tzrif kuch shel tzayadin she'arbin ba'asa ofos v'asoi kikaveres shemashba'as v'holachas gago v'kirosav." Rashi says it's actually made not like a tent. According to Rashi, it's made like a beehive. A koveres. So it's made a little bit almost like a cylindrical type of shape according to Rashi. It doesn't really matter. The bottom line is it doesn't have discernible walls and roof. In other words, the roof is the walls are the roof. That's what's happening over here. So Osa Sukaso Kamin Srif, Osha samcha lekosel, or you went ahead and you leaned your sukkah against the wall. Take a look at picture 131. Now I will say again, these pictures are reflecting insights that are going to be gleaned from the Gemara in just a moment. But again, understand we're making a tent sukkah, so your schach is your roof and your walls. You have no discernible roof-wall distinction. Same thing, you're just taking a thing of schach, leaning it against the wall of your house. What's the halacha in these cases? Rabbi Eliezer posel mishum she'in lagag. Rabbi Eliezer says it's puzzle because there is no roof. A sukkah has to have a roof. A sukkah, and not just the roof, a sukkah has to have what? Walls, and the roof, it has to be a discernible domicile structure. The Chacham say no, totally kosher. Totally kosher. Tana, Moda Rabbi Eliezer, Shim Hikbiya Min HaKarka Tefach, O Shifliga Min HaKosel Tefach Shik Sheira. Rabbi Eliezer will agree, will say that's what? Now you could look at the bottom of picture 130 and the top of picture 131. Rabbi Eliezer will agree that if you built a sukkah like a tent, but you essentially lifted it off the ground, the tefach, thereby creating some semblance of an independent wall. Right? That will say, now of course what's interesting about this is, what's the status of saying that's a tefach in halacha? Right? It's lavud. So it's interesting, but he's saying is the point over here is you're creating a semblance, right, of it being lifted off the ground a little bit, or the picture 131 was you're removing it off the wall, a tefach. It's going to be kosher. My tamayu. So we'll say, so again, then it's kosher. So, my tamayu d'Rabbanan. What's the Rabbanan's logic? Why did the Rabbanan say that it's kosher? So the Gemara says, because they hold shipui ohalim ko'alim damu. Because they hold literally the slant of the roof is like the ohel. They hold it's okay for the roof and the walls to be one entity, right? The roofs could double as the walls could double as the roof, and we're good to go. Abaye ashkechid Rav Yosef. Abaye found Rav Yosef, and Rav Yosef was sleeping inside of a kilas chasanim. Now, we learned about this before. The kilas chasanim is a canopy bed. This was a two pole canopy bed. Right. So remember again, there's a pole at the head. There's in the middle of the head, the pole in the middle of the feet, and then the canopy is draped over it. Right. So it's a tent. It's a tent. Amar le kiman, he said, who are you're sleeping in this canopy inside of the sukkah? Who are you allowed to do this? Amar le kiman, Rabbi Eliezer. I'm holding Rabbi Eliezer. Shafkis Rabbanan ba'avadik Rabbi Eliezer. So are you going ahead and setting aside the position of the Rabbanan and holding like Rabbi Eliezer? In other words, you're setting aside the position of the Rabbin and holding like the Yachid. Amar le Braisa ipchatani. I have a Braisa that has the opposite version. Rabbi Eliezer machshir. The Chachamim poslin. In my version, Rabbi Eliezer says that it's kosher. The Chachamim say that it's pasul. So we'll say, so again, remember, the Chachamim who would say that a sukkah that's made like a tent is pasul, would hold that a tent is not a real structure, would therefore hold that what? You could sleep in a canopy bed inside of the sukkah because it's not considered to be a real roof structure. Shavkis masnisin va'avari kibraisa. So are you setting aside the version of the Mishnah and accepting the version of the Braisa? In other words, also we normally assume that a Mishnah is more authoritative than a Braisa. Amarle masnisin yichidahi. The Mishnah reflects a das yochid, a solitary opinion. The Sanya ha'oses sukaso kaminsrif oshes samcha lekosel. If you make your sukkah like a tent, or you go ahead and you lean a wall of schach against the wall of your home. Rabbi Natan Omer, Rabbi Eliezer posel, mipnei she'in lagag. Rabbi Natan says that Rabbi Eliezer holds that it's pasul because there is no discernible roof-wall distinction. Macham say that it's kosher. So both say, so again, in this version, Rabbi Natan is the one who's being quoted in the Mishnah. Therefore, the Mishnah is a das yachid. If the Mishnah is a singular opinion, then it becomes no more authoritative than the Braisa. So we'll say, halacha l'maisa, Shulchan Aruch paskins, that we hold that both of these sukkos will be pasul. That halacha l'maisa, if you make your sukkah like a tent, or you go ahead and take a sukkah and go ahead and lean a wall of schach against the wall, then halacha l'maisa, again, it will be pasul. However, we do adopt the distinction made in the Gemara. If you lift it off the ground by a tefach, or you remove it from the wall, a tefach, the creation of that tefach of space will be machshir the sukkah. That's the halacha l'maisa. Good, I will say Mishnah. I will say now we come to a very interesting sugya that is going to be part of our sugya of schach mats. which is always a fascinating discussion when it comes to the whole Sukkah. Here we go. Machatzeles kanim gidola. Let's say if you have a large reed mat, made of reeds. So what's the halacha? So we'll say, can you use it for your schach? So the Gemara says it depends. Asol l'shchiva. So we'll say, if the mat was made to lay down, right? People would make reed mats to lay down on. So if you made this mat to lay down on, then ultimately it's a kli. If it's a kli, then what? Mekabelas tuma vein mesachachin ba. So we'll say, so again, that's we know that. And remember again, in order to be used for schach, we learn this out from the Anonim, in order to be used for schach, ultimately again, you cannot use an item that is mekabel tuma. So if you have a reed mat, and the reed mat was made for the purpose of laying down on it, it's a kli, it's mekabel tuma, and you cannot use it for schach. L'sichoch, what if you made a large reed mat, and you made it as a schach mat? That's why you made it as a schach mat. L'sichoch, mesachachin ba, bein mekabel tuma. Then ultimately, obviously, if you fashion it as a schach mat, halacha l'maisa again, it's not a kli. If it's not a kli, it's not mekabel tuma, and therefore you could use it for schach. Rabbi Eliezer Omer, achos kitana va'achos gidola. Rabbi Eliezer says, whether it's a large mat or whether it's a small mat, in other words, Rabbi Eliezer says, I don't care if it's big or small. What do I care about? Asol l'shchiva mikabelas tuma. If you made it to sleep on it, it's a kli, it's mekabel tuma, be'misachachin ba. You can't use it for schach. L'sichoch, but again, if halacha l'maisa, you made it for schach use, misachachin ba, then you can use it for schach. Ve'ena mekabelas tuma, and it's not mekabel tuma. So both say an interesting discussion here. See, what seems to be happening over here is as follows. In the first part of the Mishnah, the Tanakama seems to be making a distinction between a large mat and a small mat. Large mat, made for sleeping purposes, mekabel tuma, can't be used for schach. Small mat, made for schach purposes, not mekabel tuma, ultimately can be used for schach. Rabbi Eliezer says, I don't care large mat, small mat. There's no distinction large, small. The only distinction is what? What was it made for? What was it made for? If it's made for sleeping, it's mekabel tuma, can't be used for schach. If it's made ultimately again for schach, then large, small doesn't make a difference. You can use it for schach. So we'll say, let's analyze. Says the Gemara, a few minutes. Haguf akasha. We have an inherent problem. What's the problem? Amrit, you said, asol l'shchiva mikabelas tuma. So first part of the Mishnah, you said that what? If you made the mat to sleep on, it's a kli, it's mekabel tuma. Ve'in mesachachin ba. And therefore, again, you can't use it for schach. Taima, and I will say, what's the problem with this mat? Da'asol l'shchiva. The problem is, I made it ultimately again to sleep on. Right? Therefore, again, I'm sorry. Taima da'asol l'shchiva. Hastama l'sichoch. Oh, we'll say, now listen to this. What the Gemara is going to point out over here is you could draw contradictory inferences from the Mishnah. Right? The Mishnah says that what? If I have a mat and I made it for sleeping purposes, it's mekabel tuma and therefore can't be used for schach. Why is the mat problematic? Because it was made for sleeping purposes. Now we'll say, what can I infer from that? What if I had no intention when making the mat? No intention. Stam, I made the mat. So we'll say, what should be the halacha? What should be the status of the mat? What should be the status? Kasha. In other words, Gemara is making an inference. The first part of the Mishnah tells you, if I make it l'shchiva, I'm making it for sleeping purposes, that's when it's going to be problematic. Hastama, if I make it, but without any intentions, no particular das, it should be kosher. For hadar tani, then later in the Mishnah, what does it say? L'sichoch misachachin ba ve'ina mekabel tuma. And then it said, if you make the mat for the purpose of schach, it's not mekabel tuma, and you can use it. Now, what can I infer from that? Taima dasal l'sichoch. Now, I can infer why is it not mekabel tuma? Why? Because I made it for what purpose? For schach purposes. That's why it's not a problem. Hastama l'shchiva. But I will say, again, at the end of the day, if I just made it stam, then ultimately, again, I would assume that it's what? For sleeping purposes, which ultimately, again, it is mekabel tuma. So I will say, see, interesting enough, you hear what's happening over here? The Gemara is just trying to figure out really about the case of stam. You see, I will say, in general, When you have explicit das, okay, then we know you made the mat for shchiva purposes, for sleeping purposes. Clear mekabel tuma, can't use it for schach. You made the schach ultimately again for schach purposes. Clear that you can go ahead and utilize it for schach. The shayla in life always comes up with when you have what we'll call das ambiguity. What? I don't have das. I don't have das. Right? The worst things in life happen when you don't have das. So I don't have das. I made a schach mat. I didn't have any explicit das. What I'm going to use it for? So can it be used for schach or not? To which the Gemara says, lo kashya, kan bigdola, kan bigtana. So we'll say the first answer the Gemara wants to give is, it's not a problem. One is talking about a large mat. One is talking about a small mat. The de facto assumption is that a small mat is made for sleeping purposes. A large mat is made for schach purposes. That's the assumption that the Gemara wants to make over here. So we'll say, so if you look at Rashi says, all right, small mat versus large mat. So we'll say, to which the Gemara says, Bishlama the Rabbanon lo kasha, el Rabbi Eliezer kasha. That's fine according to the Rabbanon, ultimately again, who go ahead and make the distinction ultimately between a large mat and a small mat. But what about according to Rabbi Eliezer in the Mishnah who did not make this distinction? We'll say, we'll stop over here. We'll continue Yirtzat Hashem with this discussion in Yirtzat Hashem tomorrow. Shkach, we'll say. You could either be otherwise. Can't be both. You have to choose a side. Choose a side. Shalom Aleichem. How are you? How was your camping trip?
Oh, nice. Nice refreshing. I never thought about this.